Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 151 in the series. Welcome back to the yarn room. It is a funny day to be filming because we've got rain outside, which on our metal roof sounds nice some of the time and loud some of the time, so we'll see how this goes. We also have a detour in town right now, so one of the big roads is being worked on, and so all of the traffic is coming down our tiny little country street. So what's usually a very quiet road for dog walking and hanging out, and you see like one car every once in a while where you're like, hey, it's my neighbor. It's not like quite like that right now. So we've had semis, city buses. It's been a wild ride. So if you hear a lot of background noise, I didn't move to the city. I didn't move the yarn room to the city. The city came to us. So that's what's going on. If you are new to the podcast, welcome. This is a podcast largely about garment design and garment modification, and especially about sweaters, but I do knit lots of other things like shawls. I have the Forvie Shawl today, and I want to take some time today to talk a little bit about some tips for beginning knitters. Now this, if you consider yourself to be someone who's followed the podcast for a while, and I know there are a lot of you, hello all of you, you might be thinking to yourself, why are we going back to the beginning? Well, it can be really useful to sit and think for a minute about some of the tips and tricks that you might share with new knitters, for example. So if someone's new to the podcast, they're going to get an earful of wonderful things today. But if you are a knitter and you are always trying to constantly lure people into our craft, these might be some useful things for you if you are teaching new knitters or if you are trying to introduce people to knitting as a craft. So we'll talk about some of those, and I would love for you to share some of those tips and tricks in the comments below. As many of you know, I do teach a lot of online classes, and one of the classes I'm thinking about starting up is a kind of beginning knitting class. So if that sounds like it might be something of interest for you or someone that you know and love, let me know. But do share comments for new knitters, tips and tricks in the comments below. And we'll see how well we match up in this episode. What else do I usually tell you? I tell you where to find me. So for those of you who are looking for me online, I'm pretty easy to find. Here on YouTube and everywhere else, I am Knitting the Stash. So over on Ravelry, you can check out project pages, and all my notes for my projects are over there. So if you're wondering about, for example, my Lunenburg sweater and how I did it, I leave all my notes over there, in addition to putting them out on these podcast episodes. And you can also find me at the main website, which is knittingthestash.com, and that's where the classes are. I have classes up there about modifying sweaters, about reading sweater patterns, about cloning sweaters. There's all kinds of really fun stuff over there. So if you're interested in taking a class with me, that's the place to start. I have the Flock Farm Yarn Shop over there as well, which features indie farm yarn from around the United States. So indie producers, small producers, I try to highlight their work and their yarn and their fiber, so you can check that out. And that's all over at knittingthestash.com. So let's jump right into, let's do finished objects and some other knitting stuff before we get to the tips and tricks. I will say, let's do a little giveaway for those tips and tricks, because I know you all want to leave those comments. I know you're going to want to leave me tips and tricks in the comments. So we'll do a giveaway at the end. I'll let you know what the giveaway might be. It might just be a secret surprise skein from my personal stash for one of you. I will do a drawing at random. That might be just the fun way to do it. Okay, we'll get to that at the end. So first off, I am wearing my Lunenburg pullover. This is Amy Christopher's pattern. I always want to move my hair out of the way because the yoke is so pretty. This is a beautiful yoke, top-down sweater. We talked about it on, I think, the last couple of episodes of the podcast, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but I did want you to see it on me, and I can put some photos in here in the podcast so that you can see what it looks like as I move around in it. It does fit. That's one of the funny things about patterns and projects, right, is that you often see these static kind of posed pictures in my group, and I always joke, one of my spinning groups, and I always joke that some of those photos, the fabric has been pinched up in the back and people are standing in a strange way, or you see those project pages where there are actually no photos of the sweater on an actual body. There's just the photo of the sweater, and you kind of wonder, did the sweater actually work out? So I'm here to say it fits. Like I can put my arms out and the sleeves don't, scrunch up. Everything's good. I do get to show you my armpits because I'm always proud of the armpits. Usually not when they're on me, but why not? So I do that provisional cast on for those underarm stitches. I did it here as well, so that when you go around and pick them up, you just pick them up. They're live. You don't have to actually pick up the stitches and create a little bit of a seam there. They're just live stitches. And so the whole underarm just looks seamless and very, very nice. So I'm down with the underarm, down with the armpit. You all know that. I've seen many of you on Instagram and Ravelry like show the armpit, like you're proud of it. And I appreciate that because I think we need a revolution. We need to appreciate our armpits. Yeah, so I'm wearing it. I love it. I did the sleeves a little bit short, like I have been for a long time now. My first few sweaters, I really loved having long sleeves that kind of came down almost mid-hand or like down to like the thumb on your hand, like really long sleeves. But I found that with those, two of those cardigans, my Alias cardigans, which I wear all the time in the fall and winter, I was always folding up the cuff, right? So that it would be about this length when I was doing dishes or laundry or even writing on the computer, because my cuffs would catch on the edge of the laptop. So I've learned now to make my cuffs, I don't know, what is this? Is this bracelet length? I think that's what they call it, right? There's like short sleeve, elbow length, 3/4 bracelet. I don't know, maybe that's what it is. But yeah, it's about the space where a bracelet would kind of hit you in the wrist. And that length is good. It's not as warm, granted, but it keeps the sweater out of my way and I don't have to constantly be tugging at the sweater or scrunching it or folding it, which I think in the long run is probably better for the fabric, if you're not constantly like pinching it and pulling it up. So yeah, I did that length for the sleeves, did the same ribbing on the cuffs that I did on the hem, about 2 inches of 2x2 instead of, I think the pattern calls for 1x1. So I made a bunch of mods. If you're interested in hearing more about the mods, like I said, you can check out my Ravelry project page or the last 2 episodes of this podcast. So episode 149 and episode 150 all have info about this particular sweater. I wanted today to bring up a little bit more about the yarn, and I've talked about this before. I think I have an entire video devoted to singles yarn and how it's not just for shawls or things like that, that it can actually be useful for sweaters depending on the yarn in the sweater, right? So for this sweater, I used the yarn that was called for in the pattern, which I've used before on a couple different sweaters, and I brought those sweaters out for you to see. This is the Lichen and Lace Rustic Heather Sport, and it is a singles yarn. We talked a little bit about it in the last cast. I talked about the fact that it is a little bit tender, so, if you're pulling on it, this one's actually pretty rough. There you go. But if you're pulling on it, you can bust it apart, if you're really tugging on it, because it is a singles yarn, it's not plied. But I find it to be partially just a little bit felted almost, or fulled. So that's why I think it's stronger than something like Brooklyn Tweed's, what is that, Shelter? I think that's their singles yarn. I can't remember the name. But Brooklyn Tweed has a singles yarn that I've also used. And it's a little bit more tender than the Lichen and Lace Rustic Heather Sport. So I used that for this. That's the yarn that's called for in the pattern. But like I said, I've knit many other sweaters out of this yarn. So this is Jakers by Isabel Kramer. It's a lace yoke. And I thought you'd like to see how the yarn works up in a kind of lace yoke. It's very subtle. But the yarn really does lay open for lace, just like you'd expect a singles yarn to. This one I knit all in a single color, and I did alternate skeins. So the little patterning that you see here is just from the skeins themselves. Had a little bit of brown and green in them. And this colorway, I really can't remember what the colorway is. I love this color. And that's a beautiful sweater. I don't wear that one as much as I wear this one, which is another Isabel Kramer pattern. This is Nasrin. Yes, I wore it. I wore it for like 2 or 3 winters straight, like almost every day when I was hanging around the house. So I wanted to show you the wear and tear. So this sweater has been worn maybe a handful of times. And I talk about this in other episodes. One of the reasons is this was the first sweater I knit. My gauge swatch was a little bit off. The sizing on this one is fine. It's just for me, it's a little bit, I feel like it's a little bit oversized, so I don't wear it as often. So this is what the fabric looks like when it's just, you know, only been worn a handful of times. And you can see my Lunenburg, obviously, that I'm wearing right now, which I will be wearing a lot of, has not been worn. It'll be harder to see the wear because it's this charcoal color, so we'll see how that one wears. But this Nasrin, I literally wore it like every day for 2 years. So you can see the wear on this one a little bit better because it is this oatmeal kind of color in the main body. And I care for this sweater. So, you know, by that I mean I wash it every season, and I will often glean it very gently to get some of the fuzzies off. But I'm also just in love with the fuzzies. So this yarn does show a little bit of wear, especially on the front, where you're going to expect to see a little bit more wear, I think. On the back, let's see. On the back, not as much wear. And that just might be because of the way I wear my sweaters. Maybe I'm always kind of like, I don't know, fussing with the fronts or something. But the back has, you can see very few pills, actually. The back looks really good. The front just had a little bit of pilling over those 2 years of everyday wear. But the thing is, this is partially what I wanted to tell you guys, or show you guys these sweaters. This is a singles yarn. So we're often taught that singles yarn is not good for sweaters. It will bias, meaning that it will skew the sweater, you know, body one way or the other, because singles yarns tend to be a little bit less balanced than a plied yarn. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. You know, you can go to the spinning channels and learn all about that kind of stuff, which I did. I love that kind of stuff. And you also hear that singles yarns aren't as durable because it's just a singles yarn, and it might break more easily, or catch and rip, or have holes in it or something like that. Not with this yarn. So like I said, 2 years of wear. Let's look at the armpits. That's probably the best place to look. I have worn this sweater. I have not mended it. That's what the armpit looks like. It's pretty good. There's no holes. Let's look at the under. Let's be really thorough here. Let's look at both armpits just to make sure. I don't see any holes. Now, if I'm worried about it, I'm looking at this armpit and I'm thinking, okay, right here, there's a little bit of a gap that was created when the armpit was made. This side's fine. Tiny gap here. I might go back and reinforce that now after a couple years, just to make sure that this sweater continues to have like a long life. But you can see no holes, a little bit of pilling, no mending, just basic wash and wear, washing it once a season and wearing it every day. So don't be afraid to use those singles yarns. The beautiful thing about Lichen and Lace, Rustic Heather Sport, is I love all the colors that Megan has in this particular yarn. I have heard that you can get the base yarn that she uses from Briggs & Little. I think that we talked about that a little bit on the last episode. So if you're looking for more colors or potentially a cheaper version, might try Briggs & Little. I feel like they're both Canadian. Yes, I know Lichen and Lace is Canadian. I think Briggs & Little is Canadian as well. So if you're thinking about shipping and things like that, or where you are in the world, that might matter to you. But I wanted to give you that rundown because I'm loving this sweater. It came out perfectly in terms of sizing. I did a bunch of modifications. And I just wanted to show you the fact that this singles yarn, this Lichen and Lace especially, is excellent for sweaters. I think it does a really beautiful job with lace, with color work, and with wear and durability over the years. So don't cross it off your sweater list if you are interested in sweaters, especially the Lunenburg, which was designed for it. So I think it really just shows off some of the beautiful qualities of this yarn with the pearl stitches and the color work and things like that in the yoke. So I could wax on, wax off about this forever, but I just want to put that plug in because I feel like sometimes sweater knitters shy away from singles yarns or are nervous about them, especially if they've never knit with them. And I just want to encourage you to at least try them once. Just see if you like it. They produce a really lightweight, beautiful, woolly sweater. So there you go. Okay, that's my PSA. I'm off my soapbox. Let's talk about the other finished object here, which is the Forvie Shawl. I keep wanting to mispronounce it and call it the Forvie Shawl. It's Forvie. And this came out of the Journal of Scottish Yarns. This was the first issue in summer of 2022. This is the insert for the charts. it's huge. If I were to unfurl this, it's like poster board size. So one of the nice things about this journal is that if you buy the print version or the digital version, you can get the digital version either way. So I used my print version little code to download the digital version, and the digital version had all the charts in PDF form, and I could print them out into basically like 8 by 11 size paper, and that was much easier to use than, you know, like fumbling around with this as I was knitting the shawl. I do want to show you one of the reasons that I was interested in this shawl is the 2-color version that really had a nice contrast between the gold and the blue. So I decided to, I think I talked about this a little bit, I decided to go with a blue, a dark blue, and a kind of silver, because I feel like the gold and the blue is a little sports teamy, and I'm not into sports at all, really. So this is my version of it. It is an interesting, it's kind of, I'm trying to figure out, it's an asymmetrical shawl, but it's not just a big triangle. You can see that it is a triangle, but it's not the typical shape of an asymmetrical shawl triangle. I'm not really doing so well with words today. You start at this end. So you start over here with I started with my darker colored yarn for the yarn overs, and you do a really neat little bit of a thing here to create this tab with an I-cord all the way around. And then you knit all the way up, and I'll put it up against my mannequin here so you can see all the interesting yarn overs that are happening to create these cool holes in the fabric. And then you transition to a section where you introduce your second color, and you're still working your yarn overs in between in your darker color, but the second color starts doing these cool, they look to me like EKG or EEG, you know, kind of like just little blips. They're like they seem scientific-y to me. So you get those little blips all the way up with the yarn overs in between, and then you just transition to a point where all you're working are the slipped blippy stitches in your second color. You could do all this in one color if you wanted to, and then all the way down to the end where, you know, you finish off your little tab for your I-cord edging so that it all looks nice and pretty. But I say it's not a typical asymmetrical shawl, in that you're not beginning here with 3 stitches or whatever it is, 6 stitches, and then ending with a large amount. You actually then taper back down over here to that small amount. So it's almost like a triangular shawl. But you have the length of the asymmetrical shawl so that you can actually do the wrap around your neck. I find those triangular shawls, sometimes you can't do the wrap, and they end up, I can't quite wear them the right way. But this one you can totally wrap and wear. And I love the fact that you can play around with the colors and textures here. So, I mean, I think one of the reasons that I chose the blue and silver is because the blue, the really deep dark blue, allows you to do the yarn overs. And, you know, if you were to do texture in the dark blue, you just wouldn't see it as much. Texture really shows up better in a lighter yarn where you can actually see what's actually happening. Whereas with a darker yarn, you don't always get to see the texture, except here you can see it through these yarn overs. So I like that contrast and the effect that you can kind of play around with that. Love these 2 yarns. These were from my stash. I was also looking for ways to get rid of stash, like most of us. This one, the dark blue, is a Madeline Tosh, old school Madeline Tosh, before they were part of Jimmy Bean's. So this was, I'll pull out the tag here. Let's see. What have we got? Here we go. This was Stargazing. So this was a Madeline Tosh Merino Light, which is a superwash merino, fingering weight, 420 yards, for I think 100 grams, something like that. So it is, you know, old school superwash yarn, beautiful with that glazing technique that Madeline Tosh is known for. So you get all of those really interesting colors. And the glazing technique it's a dyeing technique. You could look it up on YouTube or look it up on in some of your favorite dyeing books. They do a beautiful job with the glaze, or they did. I think they probably still do, even though they're not the same company makeup anymore. And then the other half of the yarn, this gray silver yarn, is Tanis Fiber Arts. So Tanis Fiber Arts is another Canadian company. This is like the Canadian episode. I do those every once in a while. Love Canada. And Tanis Fiber Arts, I've knit the sweater that I knit, the Gartrell pullover that I knit for my granddaughter was one of her patterns. And I've knit with her yarns. I've knit a pair of mittens, some other things. So her yarn is beautiful. Again, superwash yarn. But this is, I think this is maybe with the Eco Wash. I can't remember. Because she's pretty conscious about environmental stuff. And I know she does superwash yarn, but I believe she has some pure Eco Wash yarn. And this might have been one of those. It doesn't say so on the label, but I know that's one of the things she does. So this one is merino, cashmere, and silk. So you can only imagine how soft it is. This whole thing is like, it's just really, really silky feeling. And that's one of the reasons that I love to knit shawls out of this kind of yarn is they're just really soft around your neck and face. I'm into woolly wools. Don't get me wrong. I'm wearing my Rustic Heather Sport right here up against my body. But I do like, for shawls and things like that, I just think they feel better if they're really, really soft and silky. So this is her Red Label Cashmere Silk Singles. Again, a singles yarn. And this one is 420 yards for 4 ounces or 100 grams. And it's in the colorway Chris Gray, which is named after her husband. And I just love the work of this. This shawl was meant to kind of keep me busy once I got to the body of this sweater. You know, once you're doing stockinette, you know, I love it because I can do it during meetings or when I'm watching TV or whatever. But I wanted to have something in the wings that I could pick up if I wanted something slightly more difficult. So this pattern was really fun for that because of the really interesting yarn overs that are in here, the slipped stitches, the 2 colors. Even though you're never doing color work, you're only ever working one color at a time. So it's just, it'll keep your attention. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more difficult, but not super difficult, and, you know, is going to produce a really cool looking finished product, I think this shawl is cool. It's a really interesting idea. And I was really happy that it was one of the patterns from this Journal of Scottish Yarns. So if you haven't checked out the Journal of Scottish Yarns, totally check it out. I think the Woolly Thistle has copies. And there might be other venues out there that have copies. And yeah, go stash diving like I did and find beautiful yarn that can then become shawls. I don't know if you all have this. I'm sure you do. I pull out stash yarn to use for something like this. And then I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to use up stash yarn. And then I end up with like this much left over after the shawl. I'm like, oh no, now what? So we all have our burdens to bear, right? Maybe I'll put this into the blanket that I'm knitting still, or maybe I'll do something else with it. It's such soft, beautiful yarn. I kind of don't want to put it in the blanket. I'll find something else to do with it. Maybe some actual color work or another shawl, or who knows? Yeah. What do you do with your leftover ball skeins of yarn after you finish a project? Especially when you went into your stash to use it up, and then you don't use it up. Okay, so that's what I've been working on. I'm still now, I switched back to my blanket, which is the Make a Long Story Short blanket. I am 140 rows away from finishing that baby. So maybe on the next episode, I'll be holding up a massive superwash blanket. We'll talk about that. I've been trying to use up a lot of the superwash in my stash, obviously. I think some of you know I'm writing a book right now about textiles and chemistry, and I just finished a chapter about washable wool. So it was fascinating, eye-opening. I learned so many things that I had no idea about, and so I'm hoping that once the book gets put together, it'll be something that you all might want to read too. I have a chapter on there about woolite, and I'm now working on a chapter about moths and insecticides. So that one's kind of creeping me out a little bit. Not doing any experiments in my home, though some of my family members were like, oh, you should try to no, we're not introducing moths in any way to this area. It's just not happening. But they're in my mind, so it's equally creepy. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on, knitting and writing. And maybe this is a good point to transition over to some of the tips and tricks for new knitters. So I'm going to share just a few. And what I'd like to see is if you all would be willing to share some tips and tricks down below. If you share a tip or a trick, I will enter you to win a mystery skein from my own personal stash of yarn. And yeah, we'll put these all together, and I will be thinking about putting together a beginning knitting class online. So maybe that could be something you could pass on to others who are interested in learning how to knit. So my first tip is to find some good teachers. Now, that could be YouTube videos, tutorials, it could be technique books, it could be people on YouTube that you really like to follow around and you find them to be inspiring. Any of these things count as finding some basic kind of information about the craft. One of the things that just came across my desk in the last month is a Learn to Knit book by Along Avec Anna. And the reason this is cool to me is that I put together a how to read a sweater pattern class, which is free on YouTube. You can send people that way if they're looking for how to read a sweater pattern. And for that class, I asked if Anna Dervout would allow me to use her Trescow pattern. It's a free pattern from her, and I thought it'd be great to incorporate it into this free Learn to Read a Sweater pattern class. Well, I did. It's been wonderful. So many people have taken that class and really seem to be enjoying it. And then Anna Dervout and Sarah Hastings Rudolph just put together a new book. And it's a free ebook, and it's for beginning knitters. It's called Keep Calm and Get Knitting, and I'm looking at it over my computer because I have the ebook version of it. I will put the link below if you want to download a free copy, or if you have a friend you want to send a copy to. It's going to be awesome. And I'll put a few images in here so that you can see what the actual ebook looks like. So it was cool to me. It's like this wonderful collaboration of I got to use Anna's pattern in my reading a sweater pattern class, and now I can help send her book off into the world for anybody who's interested in learning how to knit. And what's in this book, it's a cool book. Her philosophy is very similar to my own, I feel like. I should say their philosophy. So it's Anna and Sarah working on this book. And their philosophy is basically there's no absolute right way to do something. There's just a bunch of different options. You want to find tools that work for you. You want to find teachers that work for you. You want to find stitches and patterns that work for you and help you develop along the way as a knitter. So in reading the ebook, I was really happy to see those mentions of we knit in the English style, but if you knit a different way, like continental or some Portuguese knitting, whatever it is, that's all cool. So very open to different learning styles, different knitting styles. There's no one right way to do it, so that's cool. And the book covers a lot of territory, from tools to a very basic pattern to questions about gauge to basic stitches, all the things you really need to get started in one place. So if you're looking for a good resource to send new knitters, that's going to be a good one. Like I said, I'll put the link for it in the description below so that you can send people over there. So that leads me to my second tip, which is don't feel like you have to just start with something boring, right? Feel free to experiment. Sometimes things get labeled as beginner or advanced beginner or intermediate, and all of those labels might be helpful, but some of the other things that are offered nowadays in patterns are even more helpful. So a lot of patterns, especially I know the ones I write, I know a lot of the designers that I really appreciate write their patterns this way. They will include the skills that you might need to go through this pattern. So it's not really about whether you're a beginner or you're an intermediate, whatever level you're at. It's about what skills you have or which ones you've acquired, which ones you want to acquire. As you guys know from watching the cast for a long time, I will often take on projects just because I want to learn that thing, right? So you don't have to practice the thing outside of the pattern. Sometimes you can jump right in. That is something that I appreciated about the beginning knitting book by Anna and Sarah, is that they offer you a basic pattern, which is a headband, not a scarf. So it's got some interesting things to it, some intrigue, some I-cord, some different techniques. And then they kind of offer you a bunch of different patterns that you could work on if you wanted to work on this technique or this skill, kind of moving you around, moving you forward. So yeah, tip number 2 is don't be afraid to experiment. Okay, so if you found a good teacher, you're not afraid to experiment. What's tip number 3? Tip number 3 is to maybe pick up a couple of books or online websites that are really useful. So a couple that I know I picked up early on, this one, Knit Fix by Lisa Cartus. Love this book. It is one of, you can see it's already like, it's like I've bent the pages and there are stains on them. I don't know why I probably was eating food while trying to fix my knitting at some point. This one is great because it goes through all the problems. It's like a troubleshooting happy place if you are a new knitter. So you run out of, you don't have enough stitches, you drop a stitch. She goes through how to fix it, how to diagnose it, how to fix it, and then to figure out maybe how not to do it again. Because once you start to recognize these mistakes or problems that you're having with your knitting, you can kind of catch them ahead of time. So in addition to having that troubleshooting section, she also has a great section about being able to figure out what's going on. So she has chapter 5, solving problems before they grow. So getting a sense of like how to read your knitting, how to spot problems right off the bat, things like that that are really difficult for beginning knitters. This book helps you through that. So yeah, I would say if this book isn't your jam, there are plenty of knit fix type books out there. I like this one because she has a similar philosophy again of there's no right way to do it. It's just, if you do it, you can do it, right? It's a very can-do kind of book. And she really wants you to learn your knitting in such a way that you can avoid problems and recognize them and fix them. So it's like a real, like she wants to pull you up and she wants to make sure that you feel comfortable with your knitting. So I really like that book a lot. Another thing that you might want to do as a beginning knitter in terms of books or other resources are the language. Knitting has all these different funny jargony terms, right? And if you've ever tried to sit down with a knitter and you start saying, garter stitch or stockinette or whip or, sable or any of those funny acronyms or anything like that, new knitters might feel overwhelmed by the language. So there are plenty of great sites online nowadays where you can look up language, look up jargon, and see what somebody's talking about. But this book, Spencer, my husband, gave this to me, and I really think it's great. It's like a little pocket dictionary almost. It's called The Secret Language of Knitters, and it's by Mary Beth Temple, and it is just a compendium of all these different terms. So from the very basics of like stitch marker and merino wool all the way to some of the more maybe strange terms like grafting or a gusset or combination knitting, things like that. So there's tons of terms in here. It's a little book. It's not super expensive, and it's all in one place. So tip number 3 is, take some assistance, find some references for fixing your knits, troubleshooting, and for the language that you're going to need to learn. And I would say stay away from things like the principles of knitting. First off, the huge, massive, awesome technique book, because some new knitters will feel overwhelmed by that kind of thing. If you start with something that's a little smaller, more manageable, and more focused, you might be a little less overwhelmed in the beginning and feel like you can do it too. I'm not saying don't get the principles of knitting. I'm staring at my copy right now. I love that book. But maybe that's week 2, All right, I've shared 3 of my top tips. Find good teachers, experiment, don't be afraid, and find some good reference books that'll get you through. I'd love to know your tips and tricks. So if you'd be willing to leave them in the comments below, that would be really helpful for new knitters, for me, for everyone else here who has someone they love who they want to bring into the craft. And I will do a random draw. And in a couple weeks' time when I do the next podcast, I will choose a winner who will get a secret, I don't know what it'll be, a skein from my stash. It'll be a fun prize. Yeah, and we'll do it as a draw. All the details for the giveaway will be in the description below. So I think that's it for today. That's a lot. We did 2 finished objects. We talked about singles yarn. We talked about tips for beginning knitters. Good stuff's happening around here. It was lovely to see all of you. I hope you're taking good care. And until next time, happy knitting.